There are two things that you should understand about the employment of Mrs. Ohaus. First, many of you may not be aware that although there are a variety of problems, which I will speak about soon, and some you have heard about, I have in fact heard what our parents and students said at the last meeting. And even though it is against my better judgment, I am willing to work with the Teachers Association and Mrs. Ohaus to work toward creating a position that would be a position she would be eligible for. I discussed this with her last Thursday when we discussed my recommendation of non-renewal. I want the theater program to continue. I am not opposed to seeing Mrs. Ohaus direct plays in the future here in Hoboken if she is interested in the job. This is my best effort to compromise with many stakeholders we have who are interested in seeing Mrs. Ohaus continue her work in the theater program, while at the same time not granting tenure as a teacher in a situation where I have reservations about recommending her for tenure. This also takes into consideration her interest in making some changes to her work. So what do I mean by that? You should know that Mrs. Ohaus prefers to no longer be involved with the school plays, but instead chooses to work as a regular classroom teacher. She mentioned this for the first time we met on April 5th, and she mentioned this again last week. The problem with this option is that it would lead to tenure, and I'm not willing to recommend that at this time. The other problem is that, except for this year, Hoboken High School has had one teacher who was assigned to teach elective drama classes. At the same time, we've documented needs in reading, math, and writing, and so based on our academic needs, I believe it would be more important to invest in improving academic outcomes for students in our core areas. Mr. Ramos is in fact able to handle all the students interested in these elective classes and still maintain reasonable class sizes. In other words, there is no need to replace Mrs. Ohaus in her teaching position. She was just assigned 3 classes this year. Before that, she did not have any teaching responsibilities, and so creating a position that is not necessary would not be fair to people of this community. Due to a variety of circumstances, as I mentioned, we are dealing with some unique situations. You have a longtime district employee who does not have tenure, so it doesn't make sense. Usually someone who's been in the school district for a decade or more usually has tenure. But that's because you have a teacher who at one point for many years operated without, she's a theater director, she operated without a certificate, a teaching certificate. She earned her certificate, but she was not assigned classes. By all accounts, no doubt about it, she produces some very good plays, but you need to keep in mind, as for our students, that there is a big picture and much that happens behind the scenes. So I'm going to talk to you about that. As you know, I met with Mrs. Ohaus in early April to discuss a variety of legitimate concerns. Many of those concerns were expressed by Mr. Carter and Mr. Ruzak, so you understand why I needed to speak to her. I have some correspondence that stuck out in my mind in the form of email that I would like to share with you. So these are bits of correspondence from different people, and I think that this is something, so you should understand exactly why I would have a meeting with her, okay? So the first part, this is something that I have, unfortunately, this is from Mr. Carter to Mrs. Ohaus. I guess it's a reference to a meeting. So again, these types of things are things that sort of created some curiosity on my part and the need to feel that I have to have a discussion with Mrs. Ohaus. On Monday, unfortunately this did not work. Ms. Ohaus, due in no small way to the incident which occurred on Friday, it is my understanding, and the matter has been confirmed, that a student at the high school committed a theft of your wallet from your purse at Hoboken High School and removed a bank card. The student used the bank credit card at a nearby ATM machine and withdrew $500 of your money. It has been determined that the student was able to do this because your PIN has been compromised as a result of your sharing your personal identification number with one or more students. So what we're talking about here, the theft part is unfortunate. Most of that money was recovered, but the problem is that there was a situation where a teacher handed over a card, and also there was the reason the student took it is because they knew the PIN number. I'm hard pressed.
Is this necessary? I'm going to ask the chair.
Well,
The public wants to know.
they want to know that they're here. Excuse me. I believe she signed. Excuse me. I'm speaking.
Right.
Just the chair recognizes me.
Yes.
I'm just saying, I'm asking, do we have to go through each thing?
Well, they're going to come up and say that there's no reasons. I think the public needs to know. If she doesn't want it, she shouldn't have signed the rice letter, okay? Do you understand?
Okay.
I mean, for 2 meetings, we've sat through this.
Let the witch
Everything is
hunt
fine.
begin.
Okay. So,
Let the witch hunt
again-
begin. Here you go. For the record, Mr. Davis, Madam President, for the record, please note, I'm not a big fan of public humiliation. I don't like the direction this is going in. I want that in the record. I don't like the direction it's going in.
Then, you know, what I would say about that is very simple. I am explaining to the public about why I felt the need to meet with Mrs. Ohaus in the first place, in which case I could leave it at this.
She handed out the
There are-
she's a trusting person. She trusted.
Excuse
Okay,
me,
so-
excuse me, please no
so I'm
screaming
still
from the
doing my
back of the
report,
room.
And people will have the opportunity to speak, okay? So I'd like to finish my report. So as I said, there are
Vito, do you want to
a
speak?
host of
Want to
emails.
speak?
There are a host of emails that lead me to have concerns. I'll leave it at that, if that helps. Okay? We can bring that up later if we need to know more. Okay. No one's interested in humiliating people publicly, but she did ask to have this discussed in public.
That's right.
Okay. Well,
Excuse me.
so I will bring us back then to the April 10th Board of Education meeting.
There's 2 sides to the story.
Bring us back to the April 10th Board of Education meeting. It was a little contentious.
12.
Okay?
12. Ask him to continue.
The fact that a public meeting is not a problem.
Here's the other side. Let him-
The fact that members of the public wanted to speak regarding Mrs. Ohaus, or the fact that Mrs. Ohaus spoke to the board and expressed her opinion, there's nothing wrong with that. But there is more to the meeting than just what happened here in the boardroom. There were circumstances that led up to the meeting, some of which you heard a little bit about, some of which you may or may not know about. As you know, I met with Mrs. Ohaus to discuss, like I said, those issues, and I wanted to meet with her because I knew a tenure decision had to be made. I knew another play was coming up, and on the topic, and being fair to all employees, I thought it would be fair to hear these concerns and have her have the opportunity to express her opinion. And you know the outcome. Mrs. Ohaus resigned. And if we could take a moment to look at this situation in the context of almost any other workplace, I ask a few questions that I believe must be considered. What would happen if after a discussion with the new president or CEO of your company, your organization, your business, keep in mind the discussion was prompted by concerns raised by supervisors, that you then decided to quit your job? What does a resignation under these circumstances say to anyone about the employee's ability to accept criticism or take direction? What does resigning say about the value the employee places on the job they hold? What does resigning say about the commitment the employee has to the organization? These are all questions I was left to consider, along with many issues of supervision, liability, and other concerns. When I met with the high school students after Mrs. Ohaus resigned, I was very surprised to hear that an exact example I used to illustrate a concern to Mrs. Ohaus was raised by one of her students. Indeed, Mrs. Ohaus later admitted in a follow-up meeting that she did, after our original meeting, discuss the meeting with at least one of her students. She later admitted this was wrong, but she said she was emotional at the time. There are many situations where teachers might become upset about something that happens. But I believe that any situation where a teacher crosses the line when they speak to students about issues raised about them through their supervisor, principal, superintendent, or any other administrator is inappropriate. I'm quite sure teachers would be upset if I was unhappy with their performance, and in response to my concerns, I shared their evaluations with parents. It's just something you don't do. In this incident, in this situation, this incident alone would be more than enough for a teacher to not receive tenure. There are certain things you just don't do as a teacher. Now, Mrs. Ohaus responded to our April 5th meeting in another way, which I heard someone make reference to. In addition to resigning, she claimed that she was somehow mistreated. My reputation is very important to me, and so I certainly do not want any teacher to believe that another teacher was mistreated by me or any member of the administration. She was represented by the union president, who would have been able to end the meeting. Mr. Enrico was in attendance in the room. She was represented by the union president, who would have, I'm sure, stopped the meeting had there been any mistreatment. There were many questions asked in a professional manner. That is all. There's no mistreatment. The next issue that is troubling to me appears to be a lack of honesty about certain issues. For example, at our first meeting, we discussed the issue of students who are ineligible to take part in the play being allowed to participate in the last play. There were 5 students who were ineligible who in fact participated in the play. This was also mentioned at the last Board of Ed meeting. The problem is that over time the story has changed. At our first meeting on April 5th, Mrs. Ohaus made it clear that ineligible students were allowed to participate in the play due to shortcomings of the administration, not providing her with information about eligibility standards or information about who was eligible. I was surprised to learn, I was surprised.
On TV, that is contradicted.
You-
I said that Mrs. Pickett did a wonderful job
Right.
disseminating that information to all
That's
teachers.
exactly
It's on
true.
video.
You are right, except that is how the story changed, okay? So, like I said, she made it clear at that time, and I was surprised to learn from Hoboken High School Vice Principal Robin Picapietra, she handed Mrs. Ohaus a list of the names of the ineligible students. I was also very surprised to hear from Mrs. Picapietra that when she questioned Mrs. Ohaus about how the students were allowed to participate in the play, even though they were ineligible, Mrs. Ohaus responded to Mrs. Picapietra stating that she thought that the students were doing better in school based on her review of their progress reports. The problem is that the progress reports do not support her story, that any review happened. I reviewed the progress reports myself, and I have found that almost every one of the students who were ineligible to participate in the play also were struggling with their schoolwork. The example leads to lots of problems. None of them are good. Okay? It is entirely possible that Mrs. Ohaus did not review the progress reports, in which case there's a problem. She reviewed the progress reports, another possibility, but ignored the academic realities that some of her students were facing. This once again calls into question her judgment or her understanding that students attending Hoboken High School, first and foremost, are there to receive an education in the core subjects. Hoboken High School does not use progress reports to determine eligibility, so the fact that she is using the progress reports to check eligibility is a problem. She did not follow the district standard. In another strange twist, Mrs. Ohaus also stated to Mrs. Picapietra, according to her, that she was unaware of eligibility requirements for students. This struck Mrs. Picapietra as strange because Mrs. Ohaus has dealt with this for a few different situations, and this lack of knowledge leads to more questions. Because the standards for eligibility are in fact in the student handbook. They're there. At what point should there be an expectation that employees are aware of their workplace requirements, and in particular for teachers, if they have students participating in school programs? Do employees have the unlimited right in any organization to say they're not knowledgeable about how to perform their job? Should we not have the expectation that school employees, regardless of the extracurricular or athletic activity, recognize that education in the core areas is the primary purpose for being in school? If she is not aware of eligibility requirements, that means that after her many years of employment in the district, I am concerned she has not read the student handbook. The eligibility requirements, as I mentioned, are right there on page 22. Since this incident, Mrs. Picapietra wrote up Mrs. Ohaus. Another experience I had with Mrs. Ohaus, and again, I'm getting away from the whole idea that, okay, there's these issues with Mr. Carter, Mr. Ruzak, all these problems in the past. What I'm doing right now is I'm sharing with you my experiences in the short time that I've been here, all these different situations. So another experience I had with Mrs. Ohaus has to do with Alice in Wonderland. On April 18th, I received an email with a request to approve a flyer to be distributed throughout the district. The purpose of the flyer was to notify parents of auditions that were to be held on April 18th. So you understand, if I'm afternoon receiving a flyer that's going to be distributed to parents for an audition even within a few days, that should have been done in advance, including many of the things that probably should have been done in advance. There is much more to the story about the flyer. Mrs. Ohaus never mentioned to me.
Show some respect
Ms.
and
Ohaus
go outside.
never mentioned to me that she spoke to Mr. Callaghan who has a role in scheduling the use of facilities. Mr. Callaghy, based on his desire to not pay triple time for custodial services, denied Mrs. Ohaus the opportunity to use the high school on one of the dates she requested. Ms. Ohaus never mentioned that Mr. Callaghy denied her the use of the facility, nor did she mention that she was offered the use of Wallace School, which would not have cost the district any more than what was already being spent. So let's again project this situation into almost any other work environment. How would things go if you, as an employee, were given the answer no by one of your supervisors, and then you go to the CEO or the next person higher up on the chain of commands, and you fail to disclose your discussion with that immediate supervisor who told you no? I'm sure you can understand how that would play out, and it would not be a good thing. To sort of lead us towards the end here, the issue of student sleepovers at the Ohaus residence continues to be a concern. There are a variety of purchasing and contracting issues, which we have already talked about. Mr. Davis has reported on that. There are some other things I could discuss, but at this point, I think you've heard enough. I've made my point. In every organization, there comes a point where a single individual, for a variety of reasons, they can place the function of the organization at risk. I've spent many weeks of my limited time here in the district meeting with Mrs. Ohaus, documenting meetings, investigating concerns, reviewing records, and it has detracted from the work that I should be doing, which is working to improve teaching and learning. I have no reservation with my recommendation to not recommend tenure to Mrs. Ohaus, and I truly believe this is the proper decision for the district, although it is disappointing to students. Keep in mind, I am interested in keeping her in a role like she once held as a theater director type position. From what I have learned, the district was in crisis, and you brought Mr. Carter, Mr. Ruzak, and Mr. Davis into the district. They were brought here to bring positive change. Much of the change they brought to the district was making sure that we are complying with the laws of the state and to establish standards that typically exist throughout the rest of the school districts in New Jersey. As a result, the board has been able to see some very positive changes happen. The direction is important to continue, and I am quite sure you would want me to not want me to reverse direction with the process that has been positive for the school district. The standards we are applying are applied to all teachers. We do not have separate standards for separate people, and we are not looking to do anything extraordinary or expect any extraordinary feats to recommend continued employment. For example, we want people to be legally able to carry out their assigned duties, meaning we need them to be certified to hold the jobs they hold. We want teachers to come to school on a regular basis. Attendance needs to be ongoing for the growth, attendance needs to be good for the ongoing growth of students. We need teachers who are skilled at their job, teachers who deliver quality lessons all the time. We need teachers who exhibit good judgment, who do not put themselves, their students, or others at risk, or needlessly place the district at risk. We need teachers who work with their supervisors, who are interested in honing their skills and doing their best. And we should expect more from our students, and we should demand more from our teachers. So that is my closing comment regarding this particular situation with Mrs. Ohaus. We have other non-renewals, which some of those employees have requested to have this discussion in public, others have not. Board members, like I said, I'm not interested in publicly humiliating, but people are interested in knowing, and that's why I stopped, because you get the idea.